Hey there, this is Alex Birkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. This episode is a part of our Kitchen Side series, where we pull the curtain back and show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, and brainstorming sessions that we have at our agency, Omniscient Digital. In this conversation, we go through a list of curmudgeonly marketing hot takes. So think old man yelling at the sky. Topics ranging from demand creation versus demand capture, to shiny object syndrome in marketing, to maybe the fallacy of B2B branding. Tons of stuff in this conversation. And then we transition into talks of the barbell strategy, giving very concrete and specific examples from our time at HubSpot, as well as how we're approaching this model at our agency Omniscient. And then finally, we go into Threads versus Twitter, big monolithic social networks, set up by Meta and Twitter and these companies versus the new fragmented and more niche communities, and basically the future of social and what the value is in being an early adopter on these platforms, if there is any. Without further ado, here is the Long Game Podcast.
It kind of got prompted by that hot takes. Yeah. Like y'all want to start there?
Yeah.
Someone
Totally.
posted something on LinkedIn about marketing hot takes, which how hot is it if we all agree? Or I don't know if we all agree. I agree with it a lot.
Not everybody agrees, though. I think it is a hot take and that it's contrarian. It's almost contrarian to the contrarians, which I really enjoy. It's kind of like our going back to basics or going back to being basic. And that's totally a fine thing to do. On the docket today, we've got curmudgeonly. I called it curmudgeonly marketing hot takes because it sounded like, old man shouting at the sky and being like, all this stuff is stupid. But I think we're going to agree with
new
a lot
marketers
of it.
Nowadays.
I had a request from a podcast listener, and a client, Ray from Glide, had a request on search-focused content leaders versus brand-focused content leaders whichever model applies. So I think that could be interesting. I know we flirted with that kind of topic line before, when SEO is a fit, when it's not a fit. So that could be interesting. I had some ideas around CRO and how it's applied to the blog and the SEO context, which I think the model is actually quite different from the typical website CRO or growth approach. We could talk about Threads. I think Threads is probably going to be interesting for at least 3 more days, and then we'll never talk about it again.
Very specific number of days. All right.
We'll see. And then you've got some ideas on the barbell strategy, as well as salaries and inflation, supply versus demand in the content space.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the barbell strategy a little bit, and maybe us sharing a little bit more of our career background and maybe how we barbelled it, and maybe even going against what we've said about we've kind of shat on this media company thing. And I might want to challenge our stance on that a little bit. And maybe it is a good idea. So we can start. Let's start with these I don't know how to say the word curmudgeonly marketing hot takes.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is going to tie together. So we'll start with this list. I don't remember how I found this, but this guy, Harris Spahich, had written a post. We're all about the hot takes. He just wrote 10 of them all in one post, which I liked because it doesn't follow the typical LinkedIn Think Boy format either. So the first one is creating demand is a bad idea for many startups and small businesses that haven't scratched the surface of capturing demand that already exists.
Yeah. I mean, I feel strongly about this. I feel like a lot of people are not trying to create demand anymore. But when I think about April Dunford's book on positioning, why go try to create demand for this new thing if there's already existing demand for something very related, where maybe you can take advantage of any existing heuristics and help people quickly understand your product and what you do, versus trying to have to educate the market from scratch. And maybe I'm combining this with creating a category. I
am too. And I was actually going to ask really quickly, do you two think that you understand this dichotomy of creating demand versus capturing demand? Do you think you could explain M5 on that?
I think to me, if I'm going to dumb it down, explain it I'm 5 or whatever, capturing demand is meeting people where they are when they know they're they're problem aware and they're actually looking for a solution. So the sell might be a little bit more straightforward. I'm not going to call it easy, but the sell is straightforward. Creating demand, which again, David, I thought same thing, like category creation. But I think it's more of the aspect of educating people that they might have a problem to begin with, or something might be easier or done better with a certain solution. So to me, creating demand is capturing them maybe farther up in the funnel, or maybe not, they're not in the funnel to begin with, if we're going to use that framework. Whereas capturing demand is folks that are already looking for a solution. They have already expressed that they have a problem, and they're already actively seeking help. So it is a little bit more straightforward. But when I was reading this, I was thinking, scratching the surface of capturing demand, that might speak to a misalignment with ICP or target audience. So folks go out and they do the big, flashy, fun capturing demand marketing plays, but they don't know who they're talking to yet. That's what this might be a signal of, which is why I somewhat agree.
Let's go back to the create versus capture, because I think I agree with you. And in that sense, I actually think, and maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm too dense to understand why this is such a big deal and we're all using this language now. But what you just said there with regards to the problem aware, solution aware, that whole landscape, which is sort of a rehash on the same funnel where it's top of the funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel. There's a ton of different models: ADA, attention, interest, desire, action. They're like, all of these models sort of speak to the same idea, which is capture somebody before they know necessarily that the solution exists, but you're usually tapping into an existing problem. I think we've talked about this on a past podcast, how it's very difficult to create new problems that humans care about or businesses care about. It tends to boil down to the same kind of 5 to 7 things, whatever that list is. But to me, it's really like a spectrum of like where you're reaching them. And in the create demand, it's reaching them before they knew that your solution exists. And then to David's point, in some cases, that means creating a new category or a new terminology around what that solution is. So Drift created conversational marketing, which was chatbots, right?
Yeah, I kind of started validating what people mean. And I spoke to Max over at Zora, who's like, I think, senior director of demand over there. And he was talking about this new modern marketing of like creating demand. And I was just like, what does that mean? What does demand creation mean? Like, tangibly, like what are the actions that creating demand looks like, and like what's capturing demand? I think capturing demand is paid ads, SEO, going after existing keywords. And the way he described creating demand, and this isn't like saying it's good or bad, but it's helping me understand, is like podcasts, like webinars, events, like stuff where you're not going to capture people who are looking for your product or solution yet, but you're educating the market. And so I think it's a new label for like top of funnel, or like awareness. And people are saying and people are saying like, like if you can create your demand, then like you're going to have endless demand. But I think what people miss is there's plenty of existing demand to capture right now before you try to create demand. Because that's a very expensive effort.
There's one story that this is remind me of. Sorry to interject real quick. Maybe this gives some tangible nature to it, but I don't know if this is true or apocryphal, or if I'm going to be missing the details. But do you know the term halitosis?
It's
like bad breath?
Bad breath. So I believe that was invented by an ad agency to sell mouthwash. Because like they couldn't go straight to the solution. They actually had to invent a new term for the problem. So that to me is like creating demand, where maybe there were alternative solutions before, but they coined it and they created a solution that maps to that coined term. So I feel like that might be something tangible. And to that aspect, it's how hard would it be to create a new term versus just fit into existing categories if they already exist for you?
Yeah, we had a conversation about this. I think it was last fall or earlier this spring. I think it was more about creating versus capturing demand. And we had a conversation about the oat milk thing, where, Oatly is all over the place. And not everybody needs oat milk, right? Like, to me, if we were to think about this, creating demand is a bad idea when folks haven't captured it. The capturing demand in this aspect would be like pursuing folks that are lactose intolerant or other things like that. Whereas Oatly has gone all out. I think they had a Super Bowl ad last year. Like, there's billboards everywhere. Like, it becomes this larger conversation about like lactose and all of that, which is similar to the halitosis thing. Like, is it really that bad? I don't know, but it definitely helps sales. So I think folks that try to go big before they talk to the folks that it's a pretty natural solution, that's where it's a bad idea. It's more expensive. It creates all these problems. I think as a consumer, or even like a B2B consumer, it feels now, I don't know about you all, that there's problems everywhere. Like everything, there's issues with all these things because there's all these solutions. And it makes me wonder, like, how many things in my life are a fabricated issue?
How many problems do I actually have?
Right. Like, how many ways have these businesses inadvertently created a demand for that?
That's the thing with this whole optimizer biohacker shit too, that I've completely done a 180 on, which is like all of these things that I was applying bandage solutions for. Like there's a million, and I could list off a couple. Like people are taping their mouths when they're going to sleep because they want to breathe through their noses. They're doing morning sunlight routines to set their circadian clocks. They're doing cold plunges to optimize their dopamine levels. But like, if you really just go back towards the human basics, the fundamentals that we were evolved for, it's like you probably just need some sunlight, some socializing, a little bit of exercise, and you're probably fine, and a good night's sleep. And to optimize your night's sleep, you probably just need to think about it a little bit less. So you're a little bit less neurotic. You probably don't need like the red light, the blue blocking sunglasses and all of this crazy stuff. But all of that was created by kind of poking and creating new problems that everybody's now neurotic about. But the basics, like I thought about that. I'm like I usually feel pretty good when I just do like 2 to 3 things to just like check the boxes on my basic health requirements.
Yeah, you got to make sure you're going on your hot girl walks though.
I think we could have a whole conversation about this if we really wanted to. Yeah. But what would we say? Creating demand is bad.
His second point actually says what we just said, which is creating demand from thin air is nearly impossible. At best, what we call, quote, creating demand is just improving awareness about the needs and wants that people already have.
Or things that they didn't think were an issue that you could then reposition as worse than it probably is. Like breathing through your mouth is fine.
It goes back through a core need, because like the need there would be to optimize your health. You want to be a healthy person.
Right.
There was that book that came out.
The same 5 to 7 things that folks want to optimize in life, right?
Right.
All goes back to
but you can create
needs.
new problems, or you can create new demand that arises from those core needs, whether, in a B2B context, it's making new money or like saving money. You can create new problems that sort of span up from those base level things. Like I was thinking about this optimizer biohacker stuff again, and Dave Asprey from Bulletproof was the master at this. He built this whole coffee brand on the fact that there was mycotoxins in the coffee beans, and his beans were better and they didn't have mycotoxins apparently. But then like if you actually do some research on this, he pretty much made up the problem and lied about all of these beans having mycotoxins in it and his being like better. He created like this kind of new category within that just by provoking that little need. But that speaks to that core need of being healthy and like health, feeling great. And it really leads, it's really speaking towards like neurotic, healthy people. But anyway.
Is there something to be said about all these marketers maybe agitating these pains to make them feel larger than they actually are? And it's maybe the marketers who have trouble focusing that are being affected the most, where, oh wow, there's all these other things I need to do. And maybe there's some neuroticism of the desire for success and like hoping to do everything they could to like hit those goals or be seen to be like keeping up, maybe not with the Jonases, but like keeping up with the other marketers doing these cool things.
I think that's
like a performative thing too.
This goes back to the episode that was just published, the SEO chat episode, talking about like going back to basics, which you alluded to, Alex. There's always something new, always something shiny in the world of B2B marketing, I'd say. Folks that continue to want to grow their audience or add to the noise by, like you said, agitating things that might not be as big of an issue as they make them out to be. But it makes it really hard to stay focused. It makes it hard to keep on with one project at a time, essentially.
Yeah, this is me trying to like empathize rather than shit on. Is like, imagine being, I don't know, a VP of marketing, and your CEO or whoever is seeing all these things on LinkedIn about all the new marketing things you're supposed to be doing. So there's pressure coming that way. And maybe you are trying to like hey, we need to get the basics in place, but there's like the board is all of a sudden saying you need to be on Threads or whatever. And then what turns into like, hey, we'll spend 20% of the time on those things turns into like, oh, now we're like really trying to figure out how to do TikTok or like build a media company. And all of a sudden they're getting pulled in multiple directions. Like I can see the stress of like, I know what I need to do, but there's like external factors or something adding pressure that causes them to lose focus on what they know they should be like focused on, which are like the basics. But
it makes me wonder too,
challenging that could be.
It makes me wonder too, if like, I mean, all of this makes sense from an incentive structure because people are fighting for a finite attentional pie. And it's like, should we be agitating problems more? Because I feel like we're very fluid with regards to like what you should and well, we don't have many shoulds. Like that's one big thing for me is like, I tell a lot of people, I'm like, you probably don't even need content right now. Like you should actually look at this other aspect of your business. Like that's the real fire that you should be putting out.
I said that to a prospect the other day. She was like, yeah, we're trying to get leads like tomorrow. I'm like, well, I'm not pitching you on content. Like maybe we can do it in parallel, but you should be focused on like paid ads and like some outbound sales or something if you need leads that quickly, because you're not going to get results with us that quickly. Like I want to work with you, cool brand and everything, but it's not the right time horizon. She was like, I appreciate that.
I'm talking to a prospect right now that they're a two-sided marketplace and they've really done well on the supply side, but the demand side is lacking. So they wanted to talk to us about, building a demand generation, a growth engine for the demand side of the marketplace, but their entire website speaks to the supply side. So I was like, well, if you bring all this traffic in, like, where are they going to click? Where are they going to look? The copy is going to say everything except what this audience cares about. So like, I feel like you should probably redesign the website first. Like, what are you going to do once all this traffic comes? And like they were, order of operations is kind of different. But yeah, I've never really had sort of a staunch, like, oh, you need to do demand creation. You need to do media marketing. In some cases you should, in some cases you shouldn't, but I've never felt like there's some moral universal standard that should be applied across all businesses. And for that reason, maybe we're not optimizing for capturing that attentional pie as well as we could be. But also it feels dishonest to do that.
Yeah. All right. What's next?
Educational content is weak for growing brand awareness, but many B2B marketers put content on a pedestal because it's their default tactic for everything.
I'm assuming he means educational content, like very top of funnel 101 content.
Like how-to pieces, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say as a generality, like, I don't know if all B2B marketers put content on a pedestal. I would say in my experience, in B2B, content hasn't been as valued as it could be. And I think I've personally worked at brands where there was much more of a focus on field marketing and paid acquisition, and content was actually like the underdog. Obviously, we all worked at HubSpot where content was the thing. But I don't know if it's on a pedestal throughout the industry. I think that's probably true in MarTech, but outside of MarTech, it's probably not the case.
Yeah, I think outside of MarTech, where it's maybe marketing doesn't have as loud of a voice, feels like sales tends to be like a larger voice, or like supporting the sales team as like a marketing team.
I think a rule of thumb is that you try to apply the tool that you know. And let's say the educational content context, for our own agency, we did start out by writing some more top of funnel and educational pieces. And we quickly realized that wasn't probably bringing us the awareness and the leads that we wanted. So we shifted our strategy. So I think I can empathize with that take.
The educational qualifier is interesting. I mean, I think he does mean it in terms of the top of funnel content, David, but I do think HubSpot won in terms of educational content because they were at the front of the wave. And I'm not even talking like inbound marketing, SEO. I'm just talking like educational content as a genre per se. Like a lot of people didn't know genuinely how to do a lot of the stuff that I was writing about. That stuff wasn't readily available. I don't think YouTube was as big, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's old news. We don't need another how-to article. I think this goes back to the the dichotomy I was talking about years ago, the how to versus how we. I still think educational content as a genre is valuable. It's just like how it's presented. It doesn't need to be a roundup of the top 10 pieces on Google. It's more of like, how are we doing paid marketing? Like how's Omniscient doing a podcast? Not how to start a podcast, but like, how are we doing it? Because I think that aspect, if you do want to do content as a top of funnel play and pursue some of those like high volume keywords, meeting your demand where they are, et cetera, there needs to be that subjectivity, that perspectives. He posted this a day ago. So I do think like educational content is generally different now than it was 5-10 years ago. And folks have higher standards for what's on the SERPs. And I think that they're more likely to listen to more of a subjective educational experience of like, hey, I respect this brand. How are they doing these things? What are they doing differently? Like, I know how to do the basics of this stuff, but like, what are the tips and the tricks and the hacks that I don't know yet? And I think a lot of brands have yet to get that right and rank.
I'll yes in that with regards to the effectiveness of the individual piece of content. But I also think that to do educational content well, it needs to be done at scale. A single piece of content is not going to do much. And you also need a cohesive program where you're going to capture that demand. You're going to need some sort of a content product. If you're more enterprise, like you're going to need some sort of a content product that you can own that audience, because I don't know how many, like I've searched for many things and I don't often notice the brand or the byline, especially if it's just a single exposure. Maybe across 7 to 10 times, I see the same logo. I see HubSpot's logo and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. But then still, I'd like there to be some sort of, information I can give to get updates. But I think you got to figure out that conversion side and you got to figure out that life cycle marketing side to eventually convert those people. Because if we're doing this how we content, if we're doing educational content, we want to get people on that email list, the field notes email list, because then eventually they're going to get repeated exposure to us and our ideas. And a certain percentage of those are going to self-qualify as being potential agency leads. But if we just left it to the website, I don't think it would be nearly as effective. Yeah.
So our content product is our email list, or how would you define that for listeners?
Yeah. I would define it as an owned asset. So like you own the contact information. You're not subject to algorithmic changes. It's not a rented platform. And I guess like it's more of a theoretical mental model where we sort of treat it like a product. Like we can grow user numbers, we can grow user engagement, we can convert a certain percentage of those. It's almost like the freemium version of our services. We're having each individual member of our team write about the lessons that we're learning. So they're getting a certain part of our expertise. And then some percentage of those will go free to paid conversion rate. That's a small percentage in our business because we have a high price point and a very specific target market. But I look at it as sort of the gateway, the entryway, in the same way that maybe a freemium version of a product-led company would be.
So if we were to reinvest in top of funnel SEO content, which we probably won't, but if we were, the newsletter would be our content product that we would sell before folks would talk to us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
The next one we already talked about. The marketers who swear by a single right way of doing marketing either have a hidden agenda or are completely ignorant. I think we've covered that. We've fed horse, eaten that. I'm trying to do the PETA friendly versions of these, beat a dead horse, feed a fed horse.
Feed a fed horse, yes.
PETA friendly.
Feed a fed horse to death.
That's not PETA friendly.
ABM is just salespeople with access to LinkedIn ads accounts.
So this is the second time I've heard someone say this. The first time was actually Eric Hahn who said this. And I was like, oh, I see where you're coming from. And this was out of maybe not bitterness, but feeling like a lot of money is being wasted on 6 cents, which I'm also starting to hear very regularly from people.
Yeah.
I agree with this one. I mean, I think there's a lot more nuance of like how that data is being used and how those people in those target accounts are being marketed to and reached out to. But yeah, you just use LinkedIn, find all the people that work at a company and like contact all of them as a salesperson or like email them. I don't know.
I think it's true in maybe how most people do it. It's like saying CRO is just landing page A/B testing. It's true if you look at how everybody is looking at CRO and how it's done in practice, but the theoretical model of what CRO is not that. So I feel like ABM done well, instead of like tool focused and tool first, isn't just this. Like, I would hope that there's some content synergy, and you're really like defining your target accounts, and it's like a mental model that instead of like spraying and praying at the top of the funnel and like some small percentage trickle in, you're really going you're taking a sniper like approach to a specific number of accounts. For us, like we have a podcast and we can get people on the podcast who are in our target market. That's a content play. It's not a sales play. So I don't know. I'm split on this one.
Yeah, maybe it's like ABM tools is just giving salespeople access to LinkedIn ads or something.
Well, you said ABM, like tool first ABM, whereas like people first ABM would be like podcasts. Like maybe if you're traveling, you take someone out for coffee.
Is
like
that a new marketing strategy? People first ABM.
It's what Alex said.
Yeah, ABM.
Please, no
the
more
world
acronyms.
needs more acronyms.
I need a glossary just for myself these days. I think it's like Alex said, what it is versus what it's meant to be.
Content distribution without content quality is a waste of time. Content that underperforms in front of 5,000 relevant people will probably underperform in front of 50,000 people. Absolutely agree. This is old. So the old advice, just to give some historical context, this came from, what was the guy's name?
Ross?
Derek Halpern, I believe, was the one who originated this. And he's in that old flock of bloggers, probably around when Tim Ferriss came up and Ramit Sethi. I think it was him that originated this 80-20 rule, where you spend 20% of the time creating content and 80% of the time promoting it. And that advice is still distributed.
Well,
it never meshed with me. It never resonated with me. What do y'all think?
I bought into it. I never actually did it because I thought that was way too much time and is an SEO distribution channel. So I didn't really.
Yeah.
It's like, what does content promotion and distribution even mean? Like, you're just posting it on Reddit groups? Like,
yeah.
I always thought promo was paid. Distro was like organic or manual. That's just how my brain always split them up. They're essentially the same thing, because if you put money behind a shittily written piece of content, it's still shitty. It's the same with writing a bunch of shitty like content for search. Like, you're distributing bad stuff.
Yeah.
So I agree with this.
I think paid content distribution is underrated, as a slight side note.
Yes. I think we should actually be doing more of that, which we will.
Marketers who champion some, quote, new way of doing marketing are 60 years late. They've usually just discovered basic marketing principles and slapped a new name on them.
60 years, damn.
I think I agree with this more than anything else. No, of course, that's the whole point, though. If you look at even split testing and A/B testing, Claude Hopkins wrote scientific advertising in like 1912 or something like that. None of this stuff is really new, I don't think.
I agree with this. This reminds me of number 4.
Few B2B companies have a strong brand. If they stop spinning the advertising wheel and comms hamster wheel today, a huge chunk of their revenue would stop flowing with it. I agree with the first part, not the second.
I think building a B2B brand is difficult in general. Like, similar to how we talked about the media company thing of like, outside of helpful content and ways that this brand is serving your business, like having a brand that folks gravitate to just because, I think that's pretty rare in the B2B landscape, because most people, it's all a means to an end, right? Every brand is, but I see more brand affinity on the B2C side, folks just connecting to brands just because. So I do think few B2B companies, it's just hard, especially today, to have a really strong brand and have like a community around your brand. I don't know how I feel about the second one. What does it mean, the comms hamster wheel? What do you think that means?
So he's saying that there's no flywheels they have. And that's where I think I disagree, because it doesn't necessarily mean just if you turn off advertising like that, they might have other flywheels, like there's a lot of brands that I know. Sorry, I'm using brands like organizations. And then there's brand, which is like brand affinity and recognition. There's tons I know that don't have any brand affinity. Like, they're not, like HubSpot has brand affinity. Salesforce has a huge brand, but they do incredibly well because they have basically flywheels and referral programs and things that you don't see that kind of continue on despite like them, like they need to push the the button once, and then it kind of continues and spits out two things on the output side. So I don't know if that's necessarily true. I also think for the first point on few B2B companies having a strong brand, I don't know if that's necessarily a problem. I think some need to have strong brands, but there's many where it's like I would prefer, given the trade-off, I would prefer to find a customer acquisition flywheel that's repeatable and scalable versus trying to build some sense of a well-known brand with fans. And I guess that term brand is subjective, but
I do think a lot of B2B companies invest in brand over product. Like they put a lot more money and energy into building up this brand facade, and the product is just shitty. And so therefore, if they were to slow down on advertising, like the retention flywheel, like the word of mouth with like you have your advocates and your fans, like that what doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. It's all like net new customer acquisition through this big theatrical brand play.
That's probably true, actually. Yeah, I'll actually take back part of my point there. I think I just read into that like enterprise software companies, and I was like, yeah, actually, you're probably right there.
Depends. I'm not going to name any names, but I know a lot.
Absolutely. B2B buying process is not as complex as you see on Gartner charts. A well-known brand that's unlikely to be a disaster can be enough to make a buying decision.
Can you walk me through what he means by the complexity of Gartner charts?
They hire analysts to create all these reports on like the customer journey for certain B2B categories. So if you were to buy a cybersecurity product, they have these whole, I mean, the chart is fairly simple, but it's like based on 2 dimensions usually, but they'll have multiple different charts when it comes to like, price versus complexity, feature richness and all of these things. I agree with the point on the key line here is the unlikely to be a disaster. I think that's probably the most important thing with B2B. It's the old saying, nobody got fired for buying IBM, which nowadays that's nobody got fired for buying Salesforce.
Yeah. I think the buying process that he might be referring to is there's like these super complex buyer's journeys where it's like step 1, determine need. Step 2, determine specs. And like step 3, evaluate software. Step 4, shortlist and get buy-in from finance, get buy-in from stakeholders and all that stuff. Which now I'm starting to wonder are those processes in place only because that's just the way it's always been done. So people just instinctively implement a long, really annoying buying process at these companies instead of just being like, yep, that works. Like, let's sign who's actually going to like disagree with this decision. Because they always end up getting some pretty obvious solution from my experience.
Have you ever bought software at like a big B2B brand? Like a complex piece of software, not like a, $20 a month type thing?
I remember trying to bring in Pocus when I was at People AI. That was actually tough and I did run into these complexities of internal folks, like ops teams being like, can't we just build this in Salesforce? And I was like, yeah, but here's why you can't. And so part of the buying process was if I had the desire to do this, like I would have had to get their buy-in before even going to finance, and that would have taken time. And what they ultimately did was they decided to build it in-house. And as they were building it, they're like, oh, this takes too much time. And by that point, 2 months had passed, but I needed them to come to that realization. So I guess I'm going back and forth on this. Like maybe it is a little bit complex because it's not just like as easy as swiping a credit card. There's like change management and getting buy-in internally. So even if you did get a well-known brand, it's like, well, are they going to implement the product?
I think, and it's the buying committee that's complex is like who is involved with the decision-making process and who, did you bring that in of your own accord and try to like convince the team, or did somebody ask you, because at HubSpot, I ran the process for getting a new A/B testing tool, and we already had buy-in executive level. I already sort of knew what decision I was going to make because I knew the space very well, and everything was already set up that we were going to buy an A/B testing tool. That was off the table. We weren't going to build our own on the marketing side. So the process, it was way more simple in that sense. Like we still went through the exercise and had to check the boxes and look at the pricing and features, but it was really just a formality at that point. Yeah.
I tried to, when I was back at GE, like my first job out of college, I tried to bring in Sprout Social actually. Because that was before all the social media tools had native scheduling features, and it didn't get very far. GE is so old school, and they gave me full reign on like pricing and bringing the final proposals to my boss, but there was too much red tape with like posting on social on behalf of the brand. And it was just too messy. And I remember the poor sales associate just kept trying to help me out. And I was like, I'm the end user, so I'm validating this, but I ultimately have like very little decision-making power, especially when it comes to getting in front of some of my bosses. So that was quite frustrating. I think it just depends on internal structure as well. Like if the teams you're selling into, I'm sure you guys have felt this, if they're messy and they don't really know what they're doing or who's supposed to be making decisions, it's hard.
Yeah, I'm going back and forth on this one on what I think, and I do actually think it is a complex process. Not because of any of the Gartner, I think that thing is it's over complexifying the reasons that people make purchases. I think maybe it's not complex, but it's hard because we've seen this. Like we've won deals because we're good friends with the person who brought us in. We've lost deals because somebody gets hired who's good friends with a different agency. And those are just things that we can't control. It's something on the inside, and it's not something you can factor in when you're doing your marketing, So I think in that sense, there's a lot of unknown unknowns, right?
Yeah.
The last one is there's a bubble of vocal B2B marketers sucking up to sales and finance by blaming marketing for core business problems and acting as arbiters for what, quote, vanity metrics are in hopes of being seen as, quote, one of the good ones. Do better, folks. I hate it when people say do better.
Hot takes.
I think I disagree with this one.
Wait, I haven't really seen
acting
B2B
as
marketers sucking up to sales and finance. Like, what does that
arbiters?
Like? Blaming marketing for core business problems.
I think there's a lot wrapped up in this one. I think it's. I don't know if there's like you probably shouldn't suck up to other departments. Like have a little composure, but I think it's wonderful for organizations and people within those organizations and teams to take responsibility. I think marketing in many cases in certain industries hasn't taken a lot of responsibility for revenue and lead generation. And maybe I'm reading this a different way than he had meant, but I don't see that as a bad thing if it contributes to enterprise value for the company. I think that's a really good thing for marketers to step up and do that.
Yeah, I don't get the sucking up to sales and finance thing. It's sort of like marketing is supposed to make sales easier. And you want to be financially prudent when throwing money at campaigns. So I'm not entirely sure what the takeaway is of this one. Like that feels pretty hollow.
I've also seen the inverse. So maybe there is this segment of people where this is a trend, but I've seen the inverse going on too. And again, I don't actually think there's a right or a wrong to this. But I've also seen a large amount of marketers talking about how, hey, screw tracking this. Like the attribution models aren't working for us anyway. So like, let's just do things that we think are good, that we think are creative, that are going to reach our target market, and say hell with the attribution models. And I think that's a valid approach in certain contexts as well. But I've seen a lot of that dialogue on the other side of that equation too.
I think there's definitely room for both. Like this reminds me of a couple different conversations we've had on the podcast. One of which was about laying really solid, measurable groundwork before you make those big bets, which I think is really important now as folks get hired into new roles and there's lots of flux, especially in B2B SaaS and tech, et cetera. If you come in with this big arbitrary brand play that you can't really track its impact, like it's not going to fly. I think there's foundational, measurable ways to start moving the needle, building that trust, showing your effectiveness, that you understand the audience, the product, the team, the sales cycle before you make those bigger bets. But this also reminds me of the barbell strategy conversation. Like I definitely think there's room for both here, where you have 60, 70% measurable, effective, like revenue driving. You pay close attention to its performance. You can pivot quickly. You report on that. You show your impact of not only you, but your team. If you have headcount, you're especially responsible for that. But then you save your other part of your portfolio for the bigger bets, the more foggy plays that you can't necessarily track, but they're fun and they're splashy and you're creating demand out there. And you get to try some new tactics and maybe layer in a few new strategies that your CEO might be throwing out there. Like I think there's room for both. But I do think the first part needs to happen first. If you're new in a role, you got promoted, you're an agency, I think there's room for both. But Yeah. I don't think this is an either or thing for me.
Amen. That was great. That's how I've always gotten buy-in for the things that I thought were more interesting, is first throwing red meat to executives or to the client, or, figuring out how you can like measure and map to actual tangible results first.
And I think if you come into a role and you have these big ideas and your CEO or your CMO or whoever is asking you to start small or slow down, like that doesn't mean you're any less of a marketer. Like, I think it's absolutely fair that you're held to these metrics and you're asked to report on what performs against revenue or supports your sales team. Like, they're literally on the front lines. You should want to work close with them. I think some folks come in and they want to make these huge bets, make huge changes. We've seen our clients have new folks come in that do the same thing, and it's frustrating. And you're like, hey, let's start small. Let's go back to basics. And then we can go from there. So, yeah.
Well, that was good. Do you think we should do the barbell strategy talk next? I think that ties in really well. And then the threads, I think, also ties in. And then maybe we can put aside the other stuff for the next episode.
Yeah, I think what you were just saying, Allie, of like, there's room for like both those, let's call them big swings, and also like some of the like getting the basics right. Mm-hmm. And like some of my experience in this, I remember when I was at HubSpot and we were going through a lot of organizational change, I didn't really have like a defined role, but I was like, okay, I know what the company goals are. Here's like my 4 or 5 projects that I'll do over the course of the next 2 quarters that's going to contribute to those metrics. Here's like that one big thing, or like 1 or 2 big things I want to try out that don't know if it's going to work, but the reasoning is sound. And if it does work, it's going to work out pretty well. And one of those things was, I remember at the time, HubSpot was doing one-on-one webinars. So partner with one company, do a webinar together, share contact information. I don't know if that's still something they do, but in my mind, I was like, we're a new brand in the sales technology space with the CRM. We have not done any co-marketing with sales brands. Let's just work with 20 sales influencers at the time for one huge event and call it Inbound Sales Day. And I remember pitching this to my VP at the time, Kieran, and he said, absolutely not. That's too much effort. And I was like, well, I already bought the domain, so I'm just going to do it. Like, I'm going to do it while doing everything else I'm supposed to be doing. And eventually they're like, okay, yep, here's your budget. Try it out, see what happens. We ended up getting like Dan Pink on as a speaker. He became an advisor for HubSpot afterwards. So there are a lot of tangible things that came out of that event. And we got all these well-known sales trainers and influencers to start talking about HubSpot. And I went the extra effort of, this is when I didn't know much about data. I hit up a bunch of people and on an operations team, I was like, how do I attribute or figure out whether someone paid us? And they taught me how to do that. I had a bunch of Excel sheets. I stitched the data together and I was like, oh, wow, we got a lot of purchases from this event. Like, maybe not as much as, it's not a 10x ROI, but it was like 2 or 3x. And that was enough for me to make a case of, hey, if this worked out, we should do this again and have someone else running it. But that was one of those things where made a bet or had a hypothesis, made a bet, execute on it while taking care of the 80% of my job responsibilities. That instead of jumping straight to that huge, big swing, you got to like show that you can do what you're hired to do first, which feels like right now it's a lot of people doing what should be that 20% and making that 80% of their role and just spending a little bit of time on the core stuff that is actually proven already.
I think it's important to note that as part of that 20%, people probably shouldn't expect that to be a very high win percentage. You should just be aiming for big wins when they happen. But in my experience, doing those more experimental bets, literally in the context of experimentation, you're taking large swings that are less proven or less backed by data. You can't be disappointed if a lot of those end up misses. It's the basket where you're okay with a higher failure rate. I think that's one thing that makes a lot of organizations disappointed when they do invest in some of those things is, oh, like this didn't win right away. And it's like, yeah, it's not part of the 80% of predictable bets where we have a lot of historical data and pattern recognition to prove this out. So
well, it's also an exercise in like building a minimum viable product, a minimum viable experience or campaign or whatever, like starting smaller and testing things out, or starting with conversations. Even like a lot of, this is probably speaking from my introversion, but like I feel like a lot of marketers, content marketers, like they don't have a lot of conversations, right? Like they're behind the screen, they're doing the thing. I think sometimes it's a matter of going outside of your comfort zone and just understanding, like you, David, talking to the ops team, like, how do I track this? What do I do here? Like getting support elsewhere internally, and starting small, validating small, and going from there. And I think even with a failure per se, it's still a win to try something new, build out a new project that maybe you didn't have space for before. You know, for folks that have only been doing what's known to work, it is a little bit scary to step outside your comfort zone and try something new and take that big bet. So just doing it on a small scale, an affordable scale, that itself, in my opinion, is still a win. And you can just iterate from there, or just pivot and try something brand new.
Another point on that too is, like, when I think about these two buckets, the 80% is typically going to be some sort of a flywheel, or it's going to be quote unquote scalable. That's the point. I would advise on that 20% to actually never ask the question, like, that sounds great, but is it scalable? You want to make sure it works first. And like the thing about scalability is, like, you can figure that out. Like, you can figure out how to scale it. Maybe it doesn't actually need to scale. Maybe like there's just some synergy that it creates with a scalable channel or a scalable effort. But I've seen so many interesting ideas get shot down and die just because it's not immediately obvious that it's scalable.
Well, I think about the meetups that the three of us are doing. You definitely, Alex, are meetup king, but David and I are doing a lot more dinners and local stuff. And I don't think that's even meant to be scalable. Like, it's nice that it's small and it's intimate and it's one. It could be.
I could find a way to scale that.
I know you could, but my point is, like, oh God, can you imagine? I know. For right now, I think it serves the purpose that it does, and it's cheap and it's rewarding, and it's a different experience with some of our prospects. And if it's time to scale it, if we find that it's viable and it has ROI or whatever it's meant to have, then we can grow it from there. But it's definitely more of our 20% of our quote unquote marketing strategy as an agency.
You want to have more skepticism around the core channels and less skepticism and more open-mindedness around some of these net new efforts. This is really where you want to invoke that creativity and innovation.
Yeah. And I think maybe to make this actionable for people listening who might be wondering how you even come up with these big bets. Like, one is, don't just take what B2B marketing influencers are saying on LinkedIn as things to try, like maybe, but also reason it out. But a big thing, I think, is this goes back to our conversations in the past about the value of generalists, where you get a lot more new ideas if you have more inputs to connect dots. And what I found super valuable was, as a marketer, I was talking to all the product managers, I was talking to engineers, I was talking to people in support on a sales team. And that was what helped me be able to understand the business as a whole, to figure out new initiatives to test out and pitch. And then, because like I was talking to a lot of people about product, found new opportunities, got buy-in from product to make changes to the product. Like, those are things that I think you can't do unless if you open up your aperture a lot more and taking more input, so that you can start seeing the big picture and understanding what is beyond your current field of vision. So I think that's a thing that, at least during my time at the companies I've been at, it's easy for us to just stay within our immediate team and not talk to the other teams very frequently. But that's where a lot of the learnings and new opportunities come.
This is the area for thought experiments too. I really like to think of analogous things from other industries. So this was something that I used to do in the CRO context, is if I'm working on a B2B enterprise website, I go look at like the most flashy, low cost D2C brands and see what they're doing. Or, you look at affiliate sites. You're like, I've looked at physical businesses. I'm looking at like what my barber's doing, or like what my Spanish teacher's doing. And I think, like, how can I translate this to this context, and like what things would need to be different? There's this model of like looking backwards in time instead of forwards in time. Like, instead of trying to predict the next trend, think, what were people doing 80 years ago that we've suddenly forgot about? And we have an idea. I don't know if you want to talk about that idea, but like for the podcast magazine thing, that's an example of that. If you want to bring that up, we don't have to.
No, let's not talk about that.
Okay. But yeah, we have an idea that basically it's a very old school idea, but it's very novel because nobody's doing it right now. And then I think it's a Tim Ferriss question. He's like the master of thought experiments, but like, what would it look like if I did the opposite? Like completely inversing your thinking. Rory Sutherland talks a lot about that. Actually, just a general piece of advice is to read that book on alchemy by Rory Sutherland.
Mm-hmm.
Really shakes up the brain and starts, thinking about like different ways you could do the same things. Mm-hmm. Is that all for the barbell?
Oh, yeah.
Do we want to do a quick take on Threads? Just to be...
Have you signed up for Threads?
I signed up as soon as it came out. Yeah. I don't remember how I discovered it.
I signed up and I started following a couple people, but there's nothing pulling me back in.
Same. I saw you posted once.
I posted once because I was like, let's at least put one post here.
You had some like David Goggins style, like it was like very like motivational, something like intense focus and advantage.
Intense focus is what's the word? I forgot. Yeah, intense focus is like an advantage or something. Because I was reading, I noticed that a lot of other people on Threads, I don't really know how to describe the current people I see on Threads, or maybe it's just the people I'm following, but it's a lot more like just stream of consciousness. Whereas I think Twitter turned more like it's less stream of consciousness and it's a bit more polished and people like being like funny, but it's like, I think intentional funny, like they're thinking through how they want to say things. And Threads is just like what Facebook used to be, where you're just like, here's what I'm doing.
Having a snack after school.
Yeah, to me, from a user experience standpoint, it was like a really pared down replica of Twitter. I don't enjoy the fact that I use Twitter now. So I'm in that sense, I'm like, I'm not really attracted to this. I don't want to spend time on like basically a replica. The tonality is different. Like you said, there's more stream of consciousness, and Twitter got weird. Like, I feel like there's some like dark energy there. There's just a lot of like, and there always has been. There's always been a lot of negativity on the platform. It's always been more politics influence, and Threads feels a little bit more cheeky and fun and lighthearted. But I don't know if that's necessarily like, I don't know if that's going to be a defining feature of Threads. I think that might just be because it's a new tool, a new platform, and like who knows what it's going to look like in 2 to 5 years. Like that can evolve quite a bit. One thing I was wondering is the like there's all these new networks that pop up. Threads is probably the most interesting one in recent years because it's a Meta company, and Meta crushes it at copying other people's apps, but they crush at social media. There was the Clubhouse wave. Everybody thought Clubhouse was the next big thing, and a lot of the some friends that we have like went on the platform or they wanted to be early adopters because they wanted that arbitrage window where it was incredibly easy to build a following. That died down. Google Plus died down. Like, there's a lot of networks that have come and gone. So it made me think, like, if I'm thinking from the marketing perspective, what's the value of being an early adopter?
Yeah, or like, what's the positioning? Because I forgot where I heard it, but their positioning is sort of, we're like Twitter, but not Twitter. Twitter without Elon or something. Yeah. And it's kind of if we use April Dunford's nomenclature, it's like, it's the current trend that they're riding to get traction. But at some point, they're going to need to shift their positioning so that there's a clear value for why you would stay there over Twitter. Because otherwise, it's just two separate platforms doing very similar things with maybe different people in the future. I don't know what that is yet. But for me, I'm not really a user. I don't feel the need to publicly share all my thoughts.
I haven't felt the need either. Yeah.
The individual value prop for me for Threads, which I'm not really using it, is like not as many sponsored ads and not as many overt promotional posts, right? It's just messy, real posts flying everywhere. I think right now the value add in terms of from a marketing aspect is more like one-to-one, like individual to individual. So I think the immediate value right now is definitely for like solo brands, freelancers, like consultants. Like, I think building that personal brand, maybe it's tied to a professional value or whatever, but I don't see the value for organizations and brand names right now. I think it's a little bit too raw. I don't know if that's the right word.
I think there's value though in maybe us getting involved.
From a one-to-one perspective, for sure. That's what I'm saying. Is like, if Omniscient Digital had a Threads account, I don't think it would go very far. But like the three of us as partners, the three of us as like the names of our business essentially 100%.
Ironically, though,
our
Allie,
personal brand.
I felt like I've seen way more brand and celebrity accounts on Threads than I have on other networks. And maybe that's just my feed, but like I don't follow any of them, and I'm like, I don't care what all these people think. Like I never want to follow celebrities. Like that's not a thing I'm interested in.
Maybe it's because I haven't curated my feed. I've just opened it up to, I guess, my Instagram followers and then maybe Twitter and some other people. So I might not be the best and most informed, but just from my perspective, where it stands right now, especially the Twitter v Threads conversation, Twitter to me is definitely a lot more potent of a marketing space. Not as much as LinkedIn, but
I think
I don't think Threads is up there yet.
I think that it's overrated to be an early adopter. I think FOMO is actually a really bad reason to jump in a new thing. I think, if you think about past networks, really, like when did LinkedIn come out? Like 2006, 8? I don't even know. Probably earlier.
Yeah.
It really only took off from a marketing standpoint and from an organic, B2B, like how we use it a couple of years ago. If you were early in SEO, which I don't even know what that means, right? If you're using Ask Jeeves or something back in the day.
Internet Explorer.
A lot of those brands are done. They're dead. And even the ones who did really well in the early days of Google, About.com got wiped out by algorithm updates. I don't think you necessarily need to be first, second, or third. I think you can wait and see how the dust settles and figure out what your strategy is going to be. I don't know if there's a big advantage to being first.
I strongly disagree with that. Only because like after seeing how these things played out on like Twitter and Clubhouse, and I'm like sort of convincing myself to get involved on Threads now, is maybe because there are fewer early adopters, it's easier to just connect with people you wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with. Sort of like how like Instagram was a pretty easy place to connect with well-known people, or like if that was what you wanted to do. Same thing on Twitter, like before you were getting clobbered with DMs, like it was pretty easy to get in touch with people. Versus now it's a bunch of spam. Same with Clubhouse. I've heard a lot of people connect with really interesting folks and actually develop friendships from being early on Clubhouse and spending dozens of hours on it per week. Similarly, I wonder if it's the case with Threads too, where they don't have DMs yet. But maybe if you start engaging with people there whose posts aren't getting a lot of engagement compared to Twitter, it may be easier to build those sort of relationships and like build some new friendships there on a new platform.
Seems like a personal advantage, not like a marketing advantage. So I was speaking more from the marketing context of brands jumping in on this stuff and like trying to find an arbitrage window to grow revenue. From a networking standpoint, you go to a party with fewer people, it's easier to meet the people there. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
I don't find it super hard to like get introduced to people I want to be introduced to, though. And maybe that sounds arrogant, but I don't know, like I don't care about getting introduced to like top celebrities like that. I don't see any value out there, and maybe like that's just me and other people do, but the people that I want to meet are generally a degree or two away connection wise. So if I really want to get intro to somebody, I can usually make that happen outside of organic social.
I think it's different for us because I mean we'll just reach out to people or like ask for an intro, but I don't think everyone does that. But this provides another medium to maybe connect people. But I'm hosting a dinner tomorrow night, and I just like cold message some people on LinkedIn, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm down." I'm like, "Cool."
People are pretty cool with that stuff. Yeah, like if you just reach out, like you would be surprised at the hit rate, as long as your outreach is like thoughtful and well structured. As long as it doesn't come across as super spammy or weird.
I hope my outreach isn't weird.
We talked about this on a recent podcast. I talked about it. But I also think that the big monolithic social media, it seems like that era is dying out a little bit, and a lot more of it's going into fragmented niche communities. So in that sense, I also think Threads is not really enticing to me. It's like, I don't really need another place where like everybody's hanging out. Like I kind of want like a Discord group of people who are into pickleball or jiu-jitsu or whatever, like B2B marketing executives. Like I kind of want to go straight to the source. And that's why I like these small, dinners and stuff that we curate, as well as conferences like Spring. I don't know if that's like a major macro trend or just me, but I feel like a lot of people I've talked to are kind of just tapping out of the
That's how I feel too.
Yeah.
And I'm not even meaning it from like a contrarian chic. I don't know if you saw David Khim's newsletter yesterday. I'm not trying to be a contrarian. I'm just tired. Like I'm on my screens all day. Like I don't care. And I think I've seen a lot of people doing like a copy and paste between Twitter and Threads just to see which one performs better. So I don't really need like a duplicate feed in that aspect. But yeah, I think some people in the beginning of their careers, building their network, building their personal brand, like that's when Twitter was the most powerful for me. And I have a ton of friends from it and I have a ton of connections from it. And I'm not saying like I'm past it now, but I think it just depends on your stage of life as well. Like you're getting into your business, you're getting into organization, you're building up your name and the people who are around you. And some people just, the internet is a great place for that, especially folks that are fully remote. But yeah, I think it all comes back to like you said, with the biohacking, just like trusting what's right for you and what you really need versus what you think you should do. Because I mean, if you only do what you think you should do, it's just not sustainable mentally or emotionally. I've been there. So go on Threads if you want to.
I used to read this blog called The Art of Manliness, which was
I like that blog.
Formative. Yeah, it was a very formative blog for me. But there was a blog post title that stuck with me. It was called Stop Shoulding on Yourself.
Yeah. My therapist told me that in college. It's like a very shoulda, woulda, coulda. I say that.
I like that. I reframe myself from saying like I have to or I should do this to like, oh, I get to do this or I want to do this. Or it's just a little trick. Yeah. I also, we should probably jump, but I've also been trying to reframe obstacles and challenges and stressors in my life as like, oh, wow, this is a great opportunity for me to learn something. Like I look at it with gratitude and I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like I'll emerge on the other side, like a stronger, better person having learned this lesson. This is so cool.
Yeah.
It actually really helps.
I was talking to Sam about this earlier because we have a client where it's been very challenging. Like the way they give feedback and the amount of it is a little bit overwhelming. But I think we both view it in a way where, and we're trying to make sure the team sees it this way too, where it's like, hey, it's a great thing that they're willing to have these conversations about like figuring out how to work together. Because if we can figure this out, it's going to make the next time this happens, which it will happen, much easier. So it's a learning opportunity where we're just building a new muscle and it's forcing us to like rethink how we communicate and our processes and stuff. So I love that reframing.